Welcome once again. We begin in South Africa, where private schools seem to be experiencing a dip in attendance rates as cash-strapped parents move their children to more affordable public schools, according to the most recent school survey conducted by a local credit bureau. Collecting school fees has emerged as the top challenge facing schools, which has a knock-on effect on fee-paying private and public schools.
South African households began 2023 on the back foot, battered by constant load shedding, failing wages, mounting debt, rising food prices, and looming electricity price hikes in April, which threatened to exacerbate the country's cost of living. Joining us this morning to discuss this further is Ibrahim Ansah. He's the Secretary General for the National Alliance of Independent School Association. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to join you on your show.
All right. Let's get into the conversation, and I would want you to help us understand what the cost difference is between the public and the private schools in South Africa. We understand that there's some gap and it's causing a bit of a challenge. So if you paint the picture of what the price difference or the cost difference is, would like that.
It's a very difficult question to answer because the cost difference varies from institution to institution, from school to school, and also the different provinces in our country have different per capita expenditure on their children. There isn't a standard amount per child across the country. The policy in South Africa is that each province has a budget which it expends according to its needs and according to the population in that province. So when one compares the cost of public education to the cost of private education, there is a huge differential, clearly. The top schools in our country can charge fees of up to 300,000 Rand per year. Top independent schools, that's with boarding, etc. Sometimes it's higher than that. But only the elite, the very few well-heeled people can in fact afford those schools. But despite that, those schools are well supported. On the other hand, we have in the independent school sector a range of fees that are charged by schools. Some, in fact, are no-fee schools, no-fee independent schools, because these are established by community organizations and they serve specific purposes, perhaps faith-based, etc. But just to clarify, there is obviously a huge difference between a parent who wants to send the child to an independent school versus a parent who sends the child to a public school. In South Africa, we have a system of no-fee public schools, depending on the location of the area in which the school is situated. And there are certain quintiles that are used by the government to determine which schools will be no-fee schools. So we have no-fee public schools. We have public schools which also charge fees. Some of them, depending on their historical establishment, charge fees sometimes comparable to independent schools as well. So, unfortunately, the differential between the low income earners and the high income earners is huge. There's a huge disparity in the affordability factor of independent schools and public schools. My gut feeling is that I think the thrust of your discussion is around the fact that private schools are facing severe difficulties, and in my mind there is no question that in fact that is the case. Especially given our current economic situation, given the load shedding and given all the natural disasters that we have had, certain provinces in our country have had in the last few years, the effect of COVID, etc.
Yeah.
So certainly, just to crystallize what I'm saying, that obviously it is far more affordable for a parent to have his or her child in a public school than in an independent school.
All right, Mr. Ansah, I want you to also talk about the quality of education in both schools, because if parents are having to make a decision, to take their kids out of private schools to public schools, are they expecting that these kids would receive the same quality of education, or is there a compromise, simply because now they can't afford these private schools?
Well, the only barometer that I can reliably use is the matric pass rates. Now, the national matric pass rate in the country last year was 80%, and that included all those students who wrote matric. And the quality of the pass rates, of course, vary. We have in South Africa 3 different pass rates at matric. We have the bachelor pass, which entitles a learner to get into university. Then we have a diploma pass, which does not allow a child to enter university. And then you have a higher certificate pass, which is virtually something which is a piece of paper, really, which doesn't allow the child to progress academically. So if one compares the pass rate in independent schools to the public sector, the IEB, that's the Independent Examination Board, which administers exams for independent schools, had a pass rate of 98%. 98%, which means if we use the IEB as a standard, the overall pass rate was 18% higher than the national matric pass rate. In addition, those independent schools that write the state examinations comparatively also have pass rates way above 90%. So if one uses matric pass rate as a barometer, clearly the quality of education in independent schools is far superior. The other factor that one has to bear in mind is that the numbers in public schools, unfortunately, are governed by a staffing ratio to pupils, and the average class sizes in schools, in primary schools, can be 50 per class, 50 to 60. In a high school, it's not uncommon to find class sizes of 40 to 50. So clearly, it's very difficult, and I must admire the teachers and the principals of these state schools who, despite these challenges, produce very good results comparatively. So in terms of quality, the other factor that I think one also has to consider is that parents would like their children to be educated sometimes in a faith-based institution because they value the principles, the educational principles and approaches that are used in these faith-based schools. A Christian, a Catholic would want their child to be in a Catholic school. A Muslim would want a child to be in a Muslim school, and so on and so forth. So the other option that parents have, unfortunately, the sacrifice they would have to make, is that they would have to go with the state school if they cannot afford one of these schools, and understand that they would have to do the necessary by way of inculcating their faith-based values that they would like to have in their children.
You've talked about parents being able to adjust. For those who can't afford the private schools, they might have to move their kids to the public schools. Let's talk about what this would then mean for the public schools. Do the public schools have the capacity to contain these children or students who might be moving from the private schools?
Yes, in fact, this has been a debate that has been going on for several years. When the National Alliance of Independent Schools Association, in its negotiations with the state, we have regular meetings with the National Education Department, and there is acknowledgement on the part of the National Education Department that by subsidizing independent schools in the country and by making sure that these independent schools do operate, the state saves a significant amount of money. And at the same time, these schools help to alleviate the critical shortage of space in state schools. The upshot of our independent schools facing closure is that the state schools are going to be faced under enormous pressure. And as I indicated earlier, the numbers in state schools vary from, in a good school, perhaps a school where the demand is not so high, you might have a class size of 30 or 35. But on average, in many of our schools, the class sizes are over 40 to 50. And obviously that doesn't make for good education. So the answer to the question is certainly the closure of independent schools will certainly have an impact on the state school. As it is, the state system is under tremendous pressure.
All right.
Because you have to understand that every additional 20 or 30 children, it's a question of employing an educator, and that costs add up after that.
Ibrahim Mansour, these are ongoing conversations, and we would like to speak with you again. Obviously, there's so much that is changing with regards to the spending capacity of parents in South Africa and, of course, in many other parts of the continent. But we would like to bring you in again and have more of these type of conversations. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It'll be a pleasure.
Absolutely.